Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. This is a talk video, and this is a continuation of our roundup of videos because we were a little delayed with some personal responsibilities, with some deadlines, so we weren't able to promptly address some of the content that came out the other week. So with the Fury class Interceptor, though, this being a Conquest release, fortunately this will still be relevant for the next several months. As usual, we'll take a look at the insights. We'll do our breakdown and analysis, do a little fleet prep speculation, and wrap up as we do with the free-to-play gearing of my roster. The Fury class Interceptor is a support Sith ship. They refer to it as the cornerstone of a new meta-defining Sith fleet, and it will synergize most obviously with the Sith Empire ships, but also Darth Maul's scimitar, and they clarify a little later that their intent is to distinguish between the Sith ships that currently synergize with the Empire fleets and this new Sith fleet. Down in these attributes portion, we usually take a look at the attributes, the tips, and the fact. What we have here is several new unique mechanics, new debuffs and buffs. One is a defeat save. The ship will be critical to the new Sith fleet that the Leviathan was later announced to be the new capital ship of. And the Leviathan I expect to be unlocked in time similar to both the Profundity and the Executor before it. So an August release is likely, with maybe a July announcement of the requirements. Although I think there's plenty we can prepare in advance, and we'll talk about that later. The Fury class Interceptor will bring buffs to the B-28 bomber and other Sith and Sith Empire ships. This will be pretty important because the Sith bomber's taunt right now currently fairly unreliable, and I don't really like it. With the strategy tips, they emphasize the import of the basic and the timing of the second special, so keep that in mind for when we eventually get to test this out. And with the frequently asked questions, this is where they specify that 2 more Sith ships are incoming. I expect those to be Galactic Chase releases, and later in the update was when they announced that the Leviathan was going to be the ship. And now for our breakdown and analysis, and the way that we do things here is we try to strip out some of the information to simplify our readings of this kit and to increase our understanding of what is going to go on here. So the basic ability, the Enmity class precision laser cannons, physical damage to the target for each ability block, concussion mine, healing immunity, health down, shock, or suspense present on other enemies, inflict those debuffs onto the target. So if there are no debuffs, inflict suspense on the target. Suspense can't gain buffs. Gaining bonus turn meter, recovering protection, or gaining protection up will inflict defense down. And if suspense is dispelled, increased cooldowns by 1. If suspense expires, all Sith and Sith Empire enemies gain a stack of "We have returned." So already it's pretty clear why the tips emphasize using the basic. It's going to spread debuffs like a virus. It would also seem important for this ship to go early in order to land suspense, and thematically what we see here is a lot what we see with a lot of the other ships. They tend to mirror or mimic some of the mechanics of the character of the pilot themselves. With the first special, Heavy Seeker Missiles, this is a cooldown of 2. Deal true damage to target equal to 15% of Fury class Interceptor's max health, and inflict suspense for 1 turn. Sith allies recover 20% health and protection, and that's doubled for Sith Empire allies. This is nice multi-purpose ability that looks to deal decent damage, add survivability, and most importantly, I imagined, help get suspense onto the field. Because unless this ship is extremely fast and outruns the fighter, the basics conditional suspense, the inflict of suspense there won't be triggered very often. The basic will be more effective for spreading suspense. Combine all that with a nice short cooldown, and this is going to be a very great and powerful powerful ability. The second special here, Path to Power. This is a mass assist for Sith and Sith Empire ships. Inflict debuffs on the target enemy for each active Sith and Sith Empire ally. Allies that are both count twice. And then we have here the specifics on what it means for each number of ally. We're not going to read through all of this in specifics because in most cases it's going to be the 5+ allies and 7+ allies conditions unless you start losing ships later in the battle. But to start with the existing ships that we're looking at, it's very likely that we're going to be looking at 5+ allies to start at a minimum, and then as you bring in that reinforcement you're going to hit that 7+ allies, because once you take a look at even a possible starters of the bomber, the fighter, and the Malgus' ship itself, the Fury class Interceptor, you're already at 6. Then bring in the Scimitar and you're going to hit that 7th or one of those new ships. So all that means at the start of the battle we will immediately be able to use this ability to apply suspense, and shield disruption will be possible immediately after bringing in the first reinforcement. But since the second special can also apply suspense as well with the shorter cooldown, I think waiting for the reinforcement to get the shield disruption will be pretty critical. Other ships can add the other debuffs. Shield disruption right now is the only one that the Sith currently don't have access to and may be a key debuff in counters. The unique ability here, Galaxy in Flames. This is Sith allies gain 30% tenacity, doubled for Sith Empire allies. At the start of the battle, tanks gain taunt, and Fury class Interceptor and Sith Empire tanks gain stable bulwark for the rest of the battle. When stable bulwark is lost, Sith Empire tanks taunt, and when a Sith ally takes damage, they gain a stack of reinforced determination, which maxes out at 5 until the start of their next turn. Ally Sith ships gain an additional 25% defense per stack of reinforced determination, which is doubled for Sith Empire ships. Stable bulwark, that gives plus 100% defense and offense, plus 50% max health and max protection, and plus 25% crit chance and crit damage. The first time the ship is reduced to 1% health, it recovers 100% health, gains a bonus turn, gains 5 stacks of reinforced determination, and loses stable bulwark. And reinforced determination, this plus 50% defense per stack. And with this unique, this is where we're seeing a lot of the mechanics that are going to make the Sith Empire bomber a much more reliable tank, and we see a lot of mechanics here that are going to make this fleet very survivable. It's going to be able to absorb and take a lot of hits, and the unique here is going to give that defeat save. With the reinforcement ability, Rage of Korriban, all Sith allies gain a stack of reinforced determination. All Sith allies gain 20% protection up, and that's doubled for Sith Empire allies. Inflict target enemy with suspense. I think in the near term, you don't bring this ship in as a reinforcement, but with these forthcoming Sith ships, who knows? This is just pay attention. By the time the Fury class Interceptor is in game, I expect those 2 new ships will also be in game, so we'll have a lot more clarity then, and I'm sure when we do the kit reveal and analysis for those ships, then we can revisit this reinforcement ability here and see if it's one where we can save some materials or not, or to put on the ability right away. Now let's do a little speculative prep work. Again, I expect the Leviathan to be similar to the Executor to the Profundity, so that's where we are going to start, taking a look at what we've had before to predict what we're going to get in the future. Both the Executor and the Profundity have a total of 14 character and ship requirements. In the case of the Executor, it was 6 characters, 8 ships, and with the Profundity, it was an even split of 7 characters, 7 ships. Not all characters are pilots, but they could be clues to future pilots like Dengar here in the case of the Executor. In the case of the Profundity, one of the character requirements was Mon Mothma. Not all of these ships are could be used in the fleet. Like this ship had a number of Empire fleet, even though the Executor has limited Empire synergy, but it had TIE Bomber, TIE Advanced, the Imperial TIE Fighter. And with the Profundity, similar kinds of things where both Wedge and Biggs were requirements, but those are clearly intended elsewhere. If we take all of the existing Sith ships plus the 2 that are incoming, we get a total of a potential 8. That's probably a pretty good spot to start. Although the TIE Advanced was required before, that doesn't necessarily eliminate it, but it would bring us down to 7, which might get us closer to that even split that we saw with the Profundity, or it might be the 8 ships that we saw with the Executor, or they might even go less and maybe the shuttle is eliminated. But I think because the TIE Advance would be redundant, maybe that one won't be included, or they could go for a little curveball and go with time period, at which case the Ebon Hawk is a on the fringes possibility. It's a low probability though, because it has been a requirement for the Finalizer and Holdo's Radis. Ultimately though, I think 7 Sith ships is going to be a good estimating point, and again the TIE Advanced being the Sith ship that falls out. I do hope some of you prepared the Sith fighter in advance. It's something I've been saying for over a year easily, maybe even up to 2 years, that everything is going to be a requirement for something at some point. CG's really been pretty good about making everything in game useful or usable in some capacity. There's obviously a number of characters that are still remaining to see that, but I think at some point it will probably happen. And the Sith fighter was primed to always be required at some point. That's why a lot of players were speculating and anticipating the Sith fleet for quite some time. I also really advocate to always finish your farms. Over the whole scheme of this game, in a month of extra farming is pretty meaningless, and you're not going to really lose out on gear over that time span. Because farming is actually one of the few things in this game that we actually get to finish, and what it does allow for is when moments like this occur, you can capitalize immediately. Farming in advance is about maximizing your flexibility and not have to, in a moment like right now, rush to catch up with players like me who have already set this stuff up. And the last thing we really need to emphasize here is the Fury class Interceptor itself is actually a pretty likely candidate to not be a requirement, because CG's intent usually with these types of releases is to generate money and income, and a ship like this could serve to gate the potential spenders from spending, because Conquest is a time-intensive game mode, and not all players, and maybe not all whales, will have the time to engage with that game mode to actually unlock this ship. But the reason I think it may still be a requirement is because CG has announced the Leviathan early, and I think that is to serve as an incentive for players to actually do the work to unlock the ship in the next 3 conquests, or at least set themselves up to unlock it before the Leviathan does get released. So although the Fury class Interceptor being a requirement would be unusual, in this case I think it may be a possibility, especially because it is intended to be endgame and meta. With the character requirements, I'm expecting about 7 or 8. Darth Revan is going to be a requirement. All capital ship pilots have been a requirement. Melgus possibly could not, but he's been in the game for a year. He's now in Proving Grounds. We've had plenty of time, and they do try to give some little higher level gates to prevent some newer players from going after these ships. So I think Malgus is a pretty strong candidate. Out of the obvious ones, or at least the no-brainer ones, Assassin is a slam dunk. Nobody really has a relic assassin. Most players have ignored her. I only recently brought her up to Gear 11 because I've been preparing for this and anticipating it. Sith Marauder, I think, is fairly strong. Has been required for a Galactic Legend, but that has not stopped CG from making characters requirements before. We've seen it with Vader. We've seen it with Boba Fett. It does not exclude him. I think it's fairly safe. And a lot of these ship capital ship release requirements have actually have a number of redundancies that have been fairly player friendly, like Mon Mothma as well, where they've tended to be required at lower relic levels than some of the Galactic Legends themselves, which has made it so if you happen to have the Galactic Legend, you were a little over prepared for the capital ship. Same thing with Darth Maul. I don't know if I believe that the Scimitar is going to be an ideal ship for the Leviathan, but I do think he's going to be a pretty strong candidate for being a requirement. Now the next level down, we got a mix of some speculative things that are fairly safe to a little bit more risky. Sith Empire Trooper I think is pretty safe. I think one of the new forthcoming ships will probably utilize him as a pilot. Traya I don't think will get a ship, maybe won't. Maybe it's something like Nihilus gets a ship or Scion gets a ship, something like that. But Traya is there kind of as the triumvirate representative, but also because she is a raid character, so far has not been required for anything. And I've said it in my video that I made quite a while ago now, where I said characters who were guaranteed to be a requirement for something in the future. And somehow Traya has remained free of that. I think that is going to end now. A major Sith Lord will be a requirement. Sortie is the bigger of the risks out here. This was actually brought up on a stream. Somebody wanted to know what I thought about it. I actually thought it made a lot of sense. Fairly new release, only recently or very shortly will become accelerated. Most players have ignored her in some capacity because she hasn't really had a purpose outside of Conquest, where she's been helpful for feats. Decent character, but underutilized by the majority of the player base, which makes her pretty decent character for CG to force some spending, for some grinding, for some gearing. And those are the types of things that make for a good requirement to help generate income for EA. And also the time period is right, which that amount, there is some thematic synergy there by having the correct time period. And now to wrap up, as we do here with the free-to-play gearing of my roster, and this is the gearing that I did on February 27th. This one here is primarily a little Dr. Aphra prep, but we also have the Tusken Warrior. She had been recently released, and what I do with marquee characters is I pretty much immediately bring them right up to gear 11. That has been a pretty huge boon to my Conquest performance, because I have these characters ready. I think I even had a small talk video where I talked about how being able to prep the characters in this way means it's a lot easier to go for these Conquest feats, and these new characters are very often tied into Conquest feats. So being able to work on them a little earlier means that they're going to pay off in that game mode and make your life a little bit easier. Dr. Aphra here, I wanted to take advantage of the Datacron. I think I gave her a week where I tested her out in Grand Arena to see how she functioned at gear 11, but I wanted to use that Datacron. I had prepared it in advance, so I am going to bring her up to Relic 7 right away. Which, really not how I normally do things. What I typically like to do is take characters up to some interim levels to test the character out at various stages, so that I can give a little bit more recommendations on if I think high relics are mandatory or not, especially with a support character like her. Sometimes you can get away with lower relics on a support character. Now, other game modes like territory battles has disincentivized some of that stuff, so you can't really get away with it. It's why one of my complaints about that game mode is I would like CG to raise the floor of our performance, not keep raising the ceiling, because I don't like the roster uniformity that is created by those kinds of moves. Now I'm also taking Dooku up. This I'm just doing slowly. Relic 3, so I can use some Datacrons, because right now he didn't qualify for Datacrons. I will be taking him higher because I am working on Sith Eternal Emperor. And Sith Trooper, I don't think I took him up to Relic 3, because I don't have first order characters. Okay, I took him up to Relic 3 so I can throw him in a Sith squad with a Datacron, but don't really have too many spaces for that. But he's also really just a solid character. Here's where the Sith Eternal Emperor progress lies. Couldn't really go further on some because you can see I am out of Kairos and out of some other materials from bringing Afra up. And then here is where the bottom of my roster lies. I have very few characters not at Gear 11. And that's where we wrap up for that week. We'll close this video. I do want to put out a video fairly soon talking about Conquest. It's not going to be as in-depth as others. I think there's a lot of great Conquest content out there. Bit Dynasty especially puts together some just great, really helpful Conquest videos. But I do want to show what my roster can do. I think that could be particularly helpful because I tend to have a lot less relics than other players of my level. And so I want to show that I like to encourage players in that game mode where just because you don't have the relics or you're dealing with low star characters doesn't mean that you can't participate to an extremely high level. So look out for that. Thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone. Be excellent to each other. This is Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.